My name is Arthur Chapman. The first thing I think we should talk about, if we're going to reflect on what we should be doing in the Key Stage 3 curriculum, is to just focus on aims. When thinking about aims, I'd like to recommend a work by Geert Biester called Good Education in an Age of Measurement. First thing he says is that education, a legitimate aim of education, is to socialize children into the values, aims, practices of their society. I think we'd all agree that we want education to help to create democratic citizens who can do various things, understand the stories that we share as a society. And that's a really complex question, of course, in our highly diverse and multicultural society, but it's still worth exploring. What are the stories we want to share together and tell each other about who we are? We don't want to over-socialize people. We don't want to make them, accept some given set of ideas because history education is supposed to be about opening up worlds and opening up questions. So if you focus too much on quote unquote cultural literacy, I'll be a bit concerned about that. The other thing that Biester says is that education should be trying to develop competencies, skills, abilities, as well as, bits of paper that warrant that you've got these things. Qualification tends to be, again, quite a social thing. It's focused on what society needs often, needs of the economy, that kind of thing. But it could also include, critical thinking and things like that. Subjectification, Biester says, is empowering individuals as individuals, to shape their lives as they see fit, for their own purposes. We mustn't forget that. So yeah, how much does history education do these three things? I think Biester says it should do all of them. We should be at the intersection of all of these circles. I think he's right. Another useful curriculum theory is Michael Shiro. And in this book, he articulates four ideologies or ways of thinking about curriculum. And I think it's worth asking, in your own school, in your own thinking, which of these or which combination of these do you subscribe to? Shiro says one thing you can try and do is focus on scholarly activity, learning about some disciplinary thing that happens in the academy. Now, that's important in history, but how important is it? There's been a lot of emphasis on that in the last 15 years. Have we gone too far down the scholarly road? A question to ask. The social efficiency ideology, according to Shiro, says education's about improving society, developing human capital. How much does history contribute to that? How much does your curriculum contribute to that? What can your kids do and know when they come out of history? Learner-centeredness is pretty opposite to the social efficiency in the sense that it's asking more about the individual. Social reconstruction is about improving the world, challenging injustices and, things that are deficient in our current setup. If I focus on social efficiency and building the economy and so on, I'm not actually challenging inequality. Social reconstruction says, our society has a legacy of injustice, racial injustice, gender injustice, class injustice, many different kinds, climate injustice. What are we doing to address those things? So yeah, have a think. Which of these would you want to prioritize? To my mind, I've always considered the scholarly academic important, but I think we've bent the stick too far in that direction. And we need to be asking social reconstructionist questions, for example. Okay, if we're going to teach history education, we need to know what history is. We can think about history in various ways. One is about the past and the remains of the past. In traditional historical theory, it's called res gestae, things that happened, the stuff of history. We need to develop that, don't we? And history is huge, so that's going to cause a problem for us. Which bits do we select? Not only that, though, there's also history as story. Historia rerum gestarum, it's called in the traditional Latin framing of it. But basically, history is not just the past. It's the stories about the past. It's how those stories are made. It's whether those stories are credible. It's the understanding the range of stories there are. And I think if that's what history is, then history education needs to do both. It can't just be about content. It can't just be about, the past. It has to be about understanding what it is to make sense of the past. Also, we should recognize that there are many different types of history out there in the world in children's lives. If we are scholarly academic and we focus on things like Ferdinand Brodel or the writings of historians, we're not really paying attention to the ways in which kids encounter history in reality, and we should focus on those too. So if we're going to do history properly, just to go back to my first slide, we need to accommodate these two dimensions, the past and the remains of the past, what happened, but also understanding stories and how they're made, and a diverse range of stories of different types. it seems to me. So in summary, learning about the past, we want our Key Stage 3 kids to come out knowing things about the record of the past, the evidence of the past, the basis of our knowledge, and also what actually happened, or at least what people can say about it. Not only that, though, we need to understand, help them understand how those stories are made and what the forms and limits of them are. Also, as well, it's worth getting inside how the curriculum builds dimensions of knowledge, dimensions of substantive or first order knowledge, or also we'll come to second order as well and disciplinary. It's often presented as very simple. It's a mind-bogglingly difficult, actually, as all history teachers know. And here is an analysis of it that comes from this book, Knowing History in Schools, which is open access and freely available to you through UCL Press. But actually, I've updated it because when I did the diagram in the book, I neglected two things, E and F here. But yeah, if you take the assassination of Franz Ferdinand, for example, start of the First World War, the general ideas we need to convey. What's an assassination? What's a nationalist? That kind of thing. And history teaching is difficult because you have to build up understanding of these sorts of concepts. Therefore, you have to plan and sequence that carefully over your key stage. Not just that, though, they need to learn lots of facts. How are we going to, get them to remember and understand all of that? A challenge for us. Again, it requires all these things that we've been talking about a lot in the last 15 years, retrieval practice, all this sort of thing. How are we going to structure in memory building in relation to particular facts? But it isn't just general concepts and facts. To learn history means understanding historical concepts from the time. What is an archduke? Why was it important to kill an archduke? What was a Serbian nationalist? And that's another reason why learning history is difficult. So how do we identify, the general concepts, the historical concepts, the key facts? How do we sequence and build those up over time? Key question for a Key Stage 3 curriculum designer. Not just that, though. We've got these mind-bogglingly difficult ideas that we throw around in history as if they were straightforward. Things like the First World War. That's a huge thing. It accommodates different fronts. It accommodates the experiences of millions of people. We have these terms in history that bring together thousands of individual things, and we just throw them about as if they were easy to grasp. They're not. How do we sequence the understanding of those? World War I, the Renaissance, the French Revolution, the Enlightenment. What are these things? How do we help kids learn them? But also, I want to bring in these two things I left out in this book. My colleagues have tried to think systematically about how we can build up large-scale knowledge and understanding. And they talk about building up frameworks of knowledge, if you like, timelines with different columns that help kids organize the facts into some bigger sort of structured organization of the past. How important is that? If you just plan for facts, where is the framework that allows those facts to cohere? And the important point is we're not doing propaganda in history. We're not telling kids what the story is they must learn. We want them to be able to argue about and debate their knowledge so that from the frameworks that we help them build, they can construct their own answers, their own big pictures, their own explanations of why the First World War happened, their own explanations of big things in the past. Right then, so when we're just doing our Key Stage 3 history design, we've got a challenge. How do we, first of all, conceptualize, second of all, identify, and third of all, sequence all of this knowledge building? Not only that, though, we've got to develop an understanding of the discipline of history. This involves these concepts and the kinds of questions we ask with those concepts. People talk a lot about schema for facts and use cognitive psychology to emphasize the importance of building factual knowledge and how that works. It's also true of second order knowledge. I need to know how a causal explanation works. In my Key Stage 3 curriculum, I should be sequencing that understanding, building schema for causal explanation of a simple kind, of a more complex kind, of a very complex kind, of a social kind, of an economic kind, of a political kind, of a cultural kind, over time. So don't forget to plan, it seems to me, for schema and development of knowledge about conceptual issues as well as about factual issues. We've had way too much of the factual stuff, in my view, in the last 10 years and not enough of this. In your Key Stage 3 curriculum, if you do what the current Key Stage 3 curriculum does, which is focus almost exclusively, I think you can fairly say, if you go through the topics and count them, on British things, then you're actually letting the children down. History should enable kids to address the challenges of their time. These are global challenges. They're international challenges. They're challenges of living as we do in Great Britain or the United Kingdom in a post-imperial context where there are issues of social justice and reparation to address. If we don't discuss all of that, if we don't discuss climate change and large-scale developments over time, we're really letting people down, I think. Also, in relation to the second order and the disciplinary, if all we do is focus on traditional, conventional, Western historical thinking, well, what are we doing to help kids understand how history is thought about in Chinese traditions, for example? What are we doing to help them understand how history is thought about in various academic and non-academic African traditions, for example? What are we doing to help them understand how people make sense of history in indigenous traditions in Canada, in Australia, and so on? And in Key Stage 3, if we're opening up the world for children, we shouldn't just open up the world as structured by our conventional Western academic concepts. It should be the real world, the whole world, not just bits of it. And the same applies to the content. That's me. Thank you so much. I hope that's useful. I know I've overrun. I apologize to the organisers. And thank you so much. It's been my